Well, this is special because here I am with the legend, Mark Dyne, and he's quite a fascinating person. He's also a former King Davidian. So, Mr. Wolf, this one is for you. With us on this Zoom call is David Asarnow, who is somewhat of a tech guru, and Michael Pallerino, who is our writer. So what you are watching right now is us interviewing Mark Dyne for our book. The exact title of the book we are still deciding on, but watch this space because it's going to be one of those very useful tools in what we're dealing with right now. So Mark, you've had an extraordinary career. I mean, going from being one of the original people who put together the Skype deal with eBay, and then it gets very complicated, and all kinds of remarkable deals in the finance world and the technology world. Can you share with us, like right now, what does Mark Dyne's career look like? What are you working on right now?
Well, right now I'm sitting at home dealing with the COVID problem. But
Yes.
Besides that, we're all trying to figure out how to actually make our businesses run from home. We're looking at technology advances in different areas, particularly now with the change in the current environment that we're all sitting in. We've had a lot of pivoting. So in the last 3 or 4 weeks, I would say to you, it's very different to what I was doing a month and a half ago. The pivoting has been huge. People are trying to reanalyze their business and see, A, how do they survive it, or B, how do they capitalize on it from a perspective of bringing better services to those that need it, bringing better business, and protecting their employees. Right now, it's about protecting, safeguarding, and keeping the businesses alive, much more than pure focus on growth. I think we're in a weird stage right now to be able to do that. So if you want to talk about right now, or you want to talk about what it was for the last quarter?
Well, I'm curious about all, because our book is around exactly what you're talking about. It's about transformation. It's about purposeful pivoting. So let's go back to your original involvement in Skype and leading a team that resulted in Skype being bought. So what skills, when you looked at your ability to pivot at that time, what about Mark Dyne's mindset allowed you to do that so skillfully?
Well, pivoting, whether it's that deal or any other deal, I mean, I think most companies have to reinvent themselves on a regular basis. I think that if you look at very large companies or small companies, the successful companies are continuously reinventing. They are not the same company they were 5 years before. You can see that whether that's Microsoft or Apple or Amazon, or you go to very small companies. If you're not continuously reinventing yourself in the modern age, in the last 20 years, companies are dying off. So we have seen the companies that didn't believe in reinventing, the Kodaks of the world that said, well, we take photographs the same way for so many years, that's not going to change. And even when things were seen on the horizon of digital cameras coming out and printing, Kodak didn't make the changes needed. By the time they woke up, it was a bit too late. It was very late. So in order to survive, you need to continuously reinvent yourself. I like to call that pivoting. People often refer to pivoting in a case where a company's actually already failed and they're looking for a new model. But pivoting should be happening all the time. They are points in time in a business when you have to look at where you are, where the markets are heading, and how do you change with where the market is going to be in the next few years rather than where you're at now. So pivoting can actually take place when a company's at its peak or at a very high level, not necessarily when it's failing or when its market is changing. That's a critical distinction for me.
So when you look, and then David, the next question is yours. That is my writing partner, David Asarnow. We are writing about pivoting. If you're watching right now, we are with Mark Dyne. And no, Mark, this is not live, but people are going to be interested to hear what you have to say. So examples of that. I mean, if you think about, let's look at you and Skype. What about Skype gave you that confidence and really made you, I mean, when you think about it now, it seems genius, but what about you saw the future? What was your mindset? What was your...
Well, there were two inventors, primary inventors of Skype, and they came along to us, and I met them before they had actually created Skype to help assist them in building the corporate entity and the business behind Skype. But they were the inventors of the actual product. But of course, many people could not see what it would lead to. I took meetings with people in the telecom space. They would say things like, well, who's going to sit in front of the computer to make a phone call? So I mean, no one's going to do that. We literally had the chief executive of one of the largest telecoms in the world say that to me. Of course, that's just not seeing the future, because he thought of a computer as a desktop at that point in time that, you know, took up half your desk space and had a big CRT screen, as opposed to thinking that computer could actually be fitting in your pocket, and we know it as a cell phone. So people couldn't visualize that instrument that we know as a handset of a traditional phone for the home would change, and people's habits would change. Here we are sitting on a Zoom call. People actually like to see each other on video. It's much more interactive, much friendlier than being on a telephone call, the four of us, where you can't see someone's reactions, you can't see their faces. But some people couldn't visualize that. And so you saw a lot of telecoms which had the opportunity to get into that space choose not to. They chose literally not to. Often that's because companies have an investment in a certain sector. So they've invested, in that case, let's say, in miles and miles of telephone line, for lack of a better expression, and switches. They can't come to cannibalize themselves. So what happens if you don't cannibalize yourself? Someone else cannibalizes you.
Yeah.
So I use a simple expression on pivoting, which is, you know your arm's going to get eaten. It's going to be cannibalized. Someone's going to eat it. Either you eat your arm or someone else eats your arm. If you eat your arm, at least you've lost your arm, but you're not hungry. If someone else eats your arm, you've lost your arm and you're still hungry. If I could use that extreme expression.
So I like to, well, one of the things that you're an investor in a lot of companies. And right now you mentioned that there's a lot of companies that are in that protecting, that safeguarding. One of my clients, Andy Bailey, came with his acronym, DSRO, and defense, stabilize, reset, and offense. And right now what you mentioned is people are right there in that defense and stabilization, trying to make ends meet right now, whether they're going to keep their how they're going to keep their company alive. What are some of the really successful things that some of your companies have done right now to stabilize and set themselves up for that reset and offense in the future, to cannibalize and eat their own arms?
Well, I think you have to start cannibalizing. So what you have to do is you have to right size the business first, because right now, if you keep running at the pace you were running before, but the business on the front end has fallen off, i.e. sales or business deals or negotiations have fallen off, if you don't right size your business quickly, you don't get the opportunity to take advantage of the future. You're not going to be there. So some of the things that the companies do right away is the hard part is you look at potential scale backs, executive cutback of compensation, some layoffs, reshifting of people around, because you have to right size the business in this environment. These are hard, tough decisions, but if you don't, everybody loses because the company goes out of business or won't survive, particularly in early stage startups. You may have a couple of hundred people. If you don't do something, 200 people will be out of work. If you do something, maybe 40 or 50 will. It's quite a big difference.
Yeah.
So the first thing I start with is the resizing. The second thing where you have to be careful about is not cutting too far into the bone. Because otherwise, as the business starts changing, and we're already starting to see as this is settling down, as people are getting used to the current environment, new opportunities present itself to come as they're able to shift in new directions. So you're able to slightly shift your business and manage the situation that we're in right now with COVID. But if you have gotten rid of the resources to do that, and if you haven't allowed yourself enough room to scale as it comes around, you can't take advantage of it. So if you've laid off too many people, or if you've gone into a hibernation mode, you're basically prescribing your own death for the business, because you won't be able to pivot. You won't be able to do the things you need to do. There's lead times to everything. So I think
Mark, do you think it takes a specific personality and risk acceptance of an individual? Because I'm so curious when I study the neuroscience behind individuals and businesses that are capable of doing this, there's a risk tolerance. Do you think that's a muscle that you developed early on?
Yeah, I think you do need a certain risk tolerance. I think it's more risk management. You have to understand risk. Risk is key to all breakthroughs in business. No one has a breakthrough in business without a risk. I think that's been pretty self-evident. If you look back over the past 100 years, technology breakthroughs happen because people take risks. If you don't take risks, yes, once in a blue moon it falls into your lap. But most times it happened because you took a risk. So I think the type of person that does that is the kind of person that has a balanced risk tolerance. He's not the wildcatter that goes out there throwing everything to the wind, taking a chance, and if it wins, he wins, and if it loses, he loses everything. It's always balancing that risk. And you have to have a certain personality, I think, that understands the risk first. So you have to start with understanding the risk. What does that mean? Is it a better company risk? Is it a risk that could cause pretty heavy damage if it gets lost, or can it put you out of business?
So right now, your mindset, while this is happening, this midst of coronavirus, I'm so curious how your mind is thinking. I mean, what happens to Mark Dyne's head in a situation like this?
I'm always looking at the risk and trying to balance the risk. I'm thinking about the worst case situation, then looking at it. My head puts probably, when I go to sleep, it puts a probability factor onto that risk. In other words, yes, there's a risk that everybody catches it, and the world as we know it comes to an end, and the whole world's economies collapse. Of course, that's a risk. But is that a 1% risk, a 0.5%? It's really a tiny risk, right? Then you start moving up the risk scale. There will be damage to the economy. There'll be damage to business. How big will that be? Unemployment will climb. Does that mean we'll have a Great Depression? That there'll be people standing in bread lines? And you move up that risk channel until you get to the point where you say, I'm comfortable that this is the realistic risk. And that may be pretty big band. And then you adjust according to that realistic risk. So the realistic risk for me right now is, yes, we're going to have a hit to the economy. There's going to be very high unemployment. There's going to be unemployment that probably most of us have never seen in our lifetimes before. There is, at the same time, very strong government stimulus. This is nothing new, although economists are out there talking about that. That will help mitigate quite a bit of that risk. But it will change our lives. And one has to think of the fact that lives will be probably changed permanently. I think this is a revolutionary period. I think that we're going through what people went through in prior wars, in prior epidemics, in prior shifts. There was the Industrial Revolution. People living during the Industrial Revolution had no idea they were living through an Industrial Revolution. Of course, that was not, they weren't able to conceive that. Just as we've lived through technology revolution, we don't realize that in 50 years' time, people will talk about this as my grandparents or my great-grandfather lived through the technology revolution.
How do
we
you
all lived through the technology revolution.
Knowing that we are going through a revolution, I really like where you're saying that. How would you recommend a business owner capitalize on that and serve their company, their shareholders, the community, their clients, knowing that we are and knowing that we'll look back, we won't realize what we're going through, but we are. What kind of advice would you give a business owner, an entrepreneur?
And before Mark answers this, I want you to know that Mark's hourly rate is probably a lot more than any one of us could afford. So if you're watching this, get out a pen and paper now.
Okay, so what advice would I give them? I would say look at your business very carefully, which you should be doing every week anyways. Sit with your senior management, if you have a senior management team, and try and understand elements of the business that you may not have looked at before as an owner. A lot of owners of small businesses don't actually look at all the elements of their business. You don't want to get blindsided by some element that you've just completely never taken a look at because you've never had to before. So maybe you've never met with your sales team that work a certain region of the country because it's just naturally flown in. They go out selling the product and they bring the business in. I'm using a very simple business that deals with sales and trying to, all businesses are different, but use that model for an example. But this is the time to do that, to try and understand what's going on in different parts of your business, because what was going on 2 months ago may not be going on anymore. I mean, it may have been heading that way anyways, or it may have been heading in a different direction. You may have to completely pivot different sections of your business. So
can we think of an example here? I'm just trying to think. It makes so much sense what you're saying, but we hear about companies that are making generators or masks, but is there any other company that comes to mind, either in the tech world or and I don't know if you can share any board you're on right now, but something you're looking at? I'm just thinking.
I can share some. So we have a company that's called Starship Technologies, which makes robots, which I'm on the board of. We make delivery robots, and they are, you can see them if you just Google the word Starship Technologies. They like big, large coolers with 6 wheels that deliver in neighborhoods, and they've been primarily used on college campuses up till now in the United States. They deliver hot food from the college food prep to the dorms, to the libraries, to wherever it is for people to order their food. And they've been incredibly successful on those college campuses. But as you can well imagine, that business on college campuses Well, college campuses are closed. I probably don't need to say much more about what that side of the business looks like. However, we have other elements of that business which deliver groceries in England, as an example. And that side of the business has gone through the roof. Now, as you can imagine, we look at that business and our CEO looks at that company and says, well, wait a second. College campuses don't work. However, because they closed in the meantime. And who knows when they'll open and what they'll open to. We expect that will all come back. But right now, we've got to do things. It creates an opportunity. Because now we suddenly realize we have all these robots on different campuses. Well, around campuses are neighborhoods. Campuses aren't built in the middle of nowhere. They're generally built in towns, in cities, and they have neighborhoods all around them. And those are same people that are now shut in. So now we repurpose those and say, what can we do to deal with a small grocery store in that neighborhood that's right near the campus and deliver that grocery store's products to people that live in the neighborhood? And that's a repurposing. That was never designed to do that. But suddenly we now have a delivery and a huge demand and lots of videos and lots of interviews and lots of press suddenly because we've repurposed a robot to make deliveries into a neighborhood. And that's much more for the CEO to get into discussions about. But as a board member, that was a great move of our chief executive to make that pivot and see that by understanding. And then you have to look at what is needed to do that. How many people do I need? Do I have the right people? Maybe I have to move some people from one location to another to do that. Maybe I have to skinny down my people. But at least you're suddenly pivoting your business model away from what you were doing before. So that would be one example that you could see how in this environment, suddenly a business that you might have thought, well, that must be a dead-age business that's delivering food on college campuses, no one's staying on campuses, suddenly becomes a business that's actually on fire, hot, because people need delivery of food, of groceries to their homes. That's one example of a great pivot that you can see. But those opportunities happen to people, let's say, in the garment industry, where, before that they were making clothing and they were having clothing made in China. And suddenly, the demand for clothing isn't that great anymore because most of us are probably getting dressed every morning and putting on, we're wearing 1 or 4 outfits every day and getting dressed at 9 o'clock instead of at 7. And, no one's really fancy buying new stuff to go out. I mean, say at the screen, how many of you have gone to the stores, or probably no one's gone to the stores, but how many have even bothered even ordering stuff online and buying new stuff in the last week or two? Not many.
Except for webcams, Mark. Just so you know, you cannot buy a webcam, a decent webcam, which is why David Asarnow looks so crisp and I'm a little blurry. Thank you. That is the business.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I was specifically there referring to clothing, right?
No, I know, I'm joking.
Depending on your sector,
I'm
right?
joking.
So of course, I mean, if you right now happen to have, if you're a manufacturer of bleach wipes, you have business coming out of your ears.
No, of course. Right? But yes, your point is so well taken.
You might be making clothing, and it's not a huge shift for a person with clothing manufacturers all around the world, and third world countries, particularly where manufacturing is often done, to suddenly shift to saying, can I make some of it locally? Can I reopen factories here? What does it take? Maybe it costs a bit more. And shifting, making that clothing to making protective gear for healthcare workers.
So my question is, your mind thinks like this. This is the part I'm so curious about. I mean, I'm interested in your education in South Africa. You come here. How do we teach MBA students? I do a lot of work around the country talking to MBA students about communication and branding and leadership. But how are we teaching people to have the kind of mindset that you have?
Well, a lot of, I would say, I learned over the years was by traveling a lot. Visiting different countries, visiting different people, seeing how things are done in different countries, then your mind tends to mesh those together. So I remember being back in Estonia in relation to an engineering deal related to Skype. Back, it must be, I'm trying to think right now, if you give me a second, it must be about 15 years ago, maybe 16 years ago. So that's a long time ago. And already back then in Estonia, you could pay for your parking when you pulled up at a spot. There was no meters or slots. Merely you took out a flip phone, you punched in the number that was on the spot there, and it paid for your parking on your cell phone. and if you think today, 16 years later, we don't have that in Los Angeles where I live. The best we have is you get a little ticket. You have to walk to the end of the block, pull a ticket, pay for it, put some money in it, go back to your car, put the ticket back in your car, and you're covered. Maybe I think back 16 years ago, they already had that. So we came along with that idea. And after coming back here, I sat with a bunch of guys and we said, wow, that's pretty insane. That means that the phone companies are doing the billing. Well, that makes sense. They're billing people anyways. They're sending a bill. I wonder if they could build other services. And we built a few years ago a business that was selling products. This goes back about 8-9 years ago on the East Coast. We sold it and selling a business that created a business that actually sold product and billed it to your cell phone bill. Now, I would never have been able to think of that had I not seen an engineer step out of his car and pay for parking on a flip phone. Which, by the way, you know, it's the only place I ever saw it. I never saw it anywhere else ever again, before that or after that.
That's a good point about traveling. I've never thought about that.
Yeah,
so you'll see things in certain countries. I mean, if any of you have been to Mumbai in India, we talk about deliveries in the rest of the world. And we talk about how we order something on an app and then it gets delivered in 3 days. But if anyone's been to Mumbai, you would know in Mumbai, they've been delivering lunches to people at their desk from their homes every day for the past, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 years, literally. And what happens is your family member at home makes lunch in a certain tin. And somehow between the time they made that lunch at 9 a.m. and 12:30 p.m., that lunchbox makes a way through to you. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of people that do this. That lunchbox makes its way all the way from your house to you at your desk every single solitary day, the right person's lunch on the right person's desk. And you multiply that by the hundreds of thousands of people making, the hundreds of thousands of people doing deliveries. And the fact that
someone goes to the house. Someone goes to your house and takes your lunchbox and delivers it to your family member.
I mean, it's just, you can again, Google it, look at it. It's been a system studied for years because no one's actually really been able to get a good grip on understanding how this actually works. But it basically works. Someone in the neighborhood picks it up and picks up 30 of these cans, balances them on a bicycle, takes them to a train station where someone else takes them from him. And you've got thousands of these people all doing it at the same time who transports it on the train where another person picks it up on a bicycle and gets delivered to your desk. And I think it's like 20 cents equivalent in costs.
Uber Eats.
Yeah, for 20 cents from a point to a point.
That's
from
genius.
your own home to your own desk.
Excellent point.
And then, but the best part of it all is that you have like 4 or 5 different containers that you use. Those same empty containers get delivered back to your house. Not that same day, so new ones come in. It's like a circle of containers that keep moving back and forth. So it's not like you're using disposable containers. These are like tins. They're all square metal containers, and that's what it gets delivered in, and then gets delivered back to you with the same containers.
So your point, though, is really to look at systems, what's working well, and how can we adapt it if we are going to pivot? How are we thinking? How are we thinking differently? I mean, and that's, you know, it's a word that's so bandied about we need to pivot, we need to adapt, but are we creating the environments? Are we having the right conversations? Are we bringing in the right people?
Yeah, I mean, are we thinking the right way? Are we actually looking at what's done in other places so we don't have to reinvent the wheel on every element of our business?
It's interesting you say that, Mark. You know that in South Africa, they bring, of course, I don't know when last you were there, but they bring your credit card machine to your table so that you don't have to hand someone your credit card. I've always found it extraordinary that here they don't do that yet.
They do it throughout Europe as well.
Yeah, they do it throughout, they do that throughout most of the world, actually, besides the US. That's got to do with the protocol that was set up and the way the systems were set up in the first place. The systems were set up as desktop machines that were originally plugged into landlines. So they didn't have the cell-based receiving system that they swipe at you. When they're swiping that terminal at your table it is actually verifying and validating the card from the table. Whereas the US system was set up where those were connected to hard lines, first of all. And they didn't have any cell reception. Second of all, we had a very slow uptake in that. And it actually goes back to a different problem, which is our credit cards here don't have pins. So if you step one step behind the statement you were making, which is we don't have a pin in our credit card. So if you think about most of those in South Africa, when you do it, people are putting their credit card in and then punching in a code.
But you also make such a good point here that if Americans are listening to this and pivoting, we often think, you know, there's maybe some kind of arrogance, you know, Americans, but look how much you can learn from Estonia, from India. And your point about traveling, I think is just an excellent one. Mike, I know there's a question you like to ask the people
you know what's going to ask you, Mark. Great talking to you, by the way. Isn't this all what you're referring to really a matter of opening up your mind? when you talk about traveling and culture and examining your business and always, you know, the key to pivot is sometimes when people hear the word pivot, they think that it has to be that dire situation. But you said earlier on that it's something you should always be thinking about.
Yeah, you're reinventing. So, you know, pivot, often people think of a pivot and they visualize that in their head and they think of something that's a 90-degree turn, right? It's like I'm going this way and I'm now going that way. And, you know, it's not just a small pivot. It's not just a small turn. They think of it as a big turn. But sometimes it's lots of small turns along the way. At COVID, you're forced to make the big turn because of what's happened, right? And you can't do the small turns. Right now, we have to look at big shakeups, big changes, because we're facing a, you know, effectively an existential threat to many of these businesses. Right? They may not survive if they don't do something quickly and they don't do something fast and they don't change. But yes, historically, what you want to do is you're making continuous tweaks and small changes. That's when I use the word reinventing yourself. You're slowly but surely changing your business so that it doesn't look the same in 2 or 3, 4 years' time to what it looked like before, because you're continuously edging it out and changing it.
I have a question. If you're looking at investing in a company, how do you evaluate the executive, the owner, the founder, the CEO to know if they have what it takes to pivot and reinvent continuously?
Well, you often don't. I mean, that's just the truth. You often don't. You're often taking a bet on the person. You eventually, after a while, you start to feel a person's personality, and you start to get a feel for what kind of personality that person has, whether they would do it or not. But that takes time because you've done that from experience of running into that same type of personality over 20 years. And then you start to get a feel for, will that personality do it? One of my favorite questions to a company when I'm investing is, okay, you've invented something great and it looks like it could get started, but what happens when the business gets bigger than your management skill? Because it's one thing starting a business, it's another thing managing a large business. They're not the same skill set. And almost every single CEO will say, well, at that point in time, the founder would say, I have no problem stepping down and appointing another CEO. But as we've come to learn over time, it's a very, very, very small percentage of people that will actually do that. And that often will be a big determining factor in success, because the skill of inventing and creating something is not the same skill it requires to manage 3 or 4 or 5,000 people now running that business.
Very different.
There have been, of course, those exceptions throughout history. We all know who they are. They have done that incredible change of starting something and then building it into a massive enterprise. But those are few and far between of the thousands of businesses started every year.
So in terms of your journey, we often speak about having a board of directors, a tribal council. I mean, who have been, and, you know, your group, how important is it to have this group of trusted advisors?
Well, I think what we have done over the years, what I have done is I started actually with a great uncle who has since passed, that he was my mentor. And he was a guy I turned to, and he was quite a bit older than me. And he was a guy I turned to brainstorm. And we got into many conflicts and many arguments and many discussions. And I often used to think, oh, well, he's just beyond his prime. And, you know, I'm a young guy in my 20s and he's not getting it. And then you get to suddenly crossing 45 or something, and you suddenly wake up and realize, well, maybe he wasn't so stupid after all. Maybe he wasn't past his prime. Maybe he just knew a lot more than I knew. And so over time, you start to develop respect for people that have had a lot of experience. And so you look to surround yourself with that experience. You know, when someone tells me I've got a tribal council, as you'd call a board of directors, and it's full of people, young, dynamic, smart people, I say, well, that's fantastic. But what about filling it also with people that have had lots of experience and been through crises? The people that will get through these crises that we're faced right now of COVID, they've been through the crisis of the 2008 global financial crisis. They've been through 9/11. They've been through the crash in the 90s. They understand what happens post-crash. Of course, this one will be different. But then the 2008 crisis was different as well. Every crisis has been different. It's looking for the similarities and trying to understand what happens post. Sure, they'll all be different, but they will have some similarities. People recover. People do adapt. We're adaptable creatures as humans. We adapt to our new environment.
Mark, one thing I know about you is you're very philanthropic, and I know you recently arranged a whole shipment of masks to one of the big hospitals in Los Angeles. And I've heard you described as, you know, Mark, he gets something done. He gets something done quickly. And I'm just curious, your quality of urgency and acting on things, I just love to talk more about that. I mean, you know, we're talking about pivoting and we're talking about a mindset of somebody who can make things happen and has the right contacts.
Well, contacts are overrated because everyone has them. You see, it's just that knowing how to reach them is the key thing. If you actually look at how to get to people, you know, people have used the expression of 6 degrees away. It's probably less, meaning everybody knows people that know other people. It's about reaching out to the people and saying, hey, I need some help. Who do you know? You call 10 people with that question, you'd be shocked at how many responses you'll get. Pretty insane, large number. And so you don't have to have those deeper contacts directly in there. You have to have a first level of contacts, they in turn have contacts, they in turn have contacts. And you have to have people that have faith in you, that when you say something, you'll actually deliver it. And that sense of urgency actually means something to them because they know you'll deliver. They've had experience with you before.
So how did you get the masks, Mark?
Well, you'll make one call to one group of people who then call another group of people who then say, I have a serious guy on the phone that wants to, you know, not looking to profit off them. He's looking to buy them to donate, and they know it's serious, and they know the money's there, and they know that the desire is there, and they know it will be executed, and then it just naturally comes together.
Well, it's always interesting to me because you say naturally comes together. I'm always curious, can we teach this? Can we, you know, what can people glean from us? What do you do organically and naturally that we can decode to share with others? Do you want to add to that, David? Thoughts on that?
I agree. It's how do you codify it into a system that, okay, you know, people say, well, I may have the contacts or I don't have the contacts. As Mark said, Mark, you said we have the contacts. How do you train that to someone, to a group of people that you can just make something happen if you have that positive expectancy?
Well, number one, you know, when you're talking to younger people particularly, and I'm teaching a class at one of the local high schools, you want to teach them that, you want to teach younger people as well, don't discount anybody you know. A lot of people will, particularly when they're younger, think of the person that's got connections at that moment in time and who their friends are and who their connections are. But they may not realize who that person's connections are, the 2 levels down. And so don't discount anybody, either by the way they're educated, by their social economic grouping, by their education. Don't discount anyone. You don't know who their connections are. So keep everyone on a friendly basis. Teach people that they need to show respect to everybody, irrespective of their position in life. You don't know who may have that connection that you need. But if you treat people with full respect all the way through, they will reach out to their connections because you asked them to. And when I'm asking for a connection, I'm asking everyone from every walk of life. You know, this is not just a call to a CEO. This is calls that I've established to people, a network I've established over many, many years. It goes very, very deep because all the way along, I've never discounted what connection someone may have.
So it's so foundational. It's such a universal truth. So I don't want to take too much of Mark's extremely precious time, but that's, I mean, in terms of what we're looking for and understanding, and we're very excited about this project, David and Michael and I, because what we're trying to do is get thought leaders like you and people who've been so successful, Mark, and you have, I say, Mark is modest, but he has, and try and say, what lessons, what do we extrapolate? And you have so much wisdom. You know, last thoughts, if you know, you've got a platform right here, because on my platform and certainly with the book, what do you think, and you've said a lot of it, but just final words, what would you like to say to people who are feeling very despondent right now? I mean, there's such a negative sense, there's such a sense of anxiety, and for many that is deeply paralyzing.
Yes, this is always a tough question. This is the toughest question I'm asked regularly, is how to give hope, how to get people to think things will change. Things are bad right now. I think minimizing it makes people more paranoid, makes people more nervous. We can't minimize it. Things are bad. Things are pretty bad right now. There are people who have lost jobs. There's people that have lost income. There's people that have lost the ability to put food on their table. But history has shown us that mankind perseveres. We are survivors. And things will come right. Obviously, depending on each country, how right that is, we don't know yet. But things will come right. Things do reorganize themselves. Mankind has proven time and time again that we can reorganize ourselves and come back from the most terrible times and terrible disasters. people tend to forget that it wasn't very long ago that we lost, I think, approximately a third of the world's population to bubonic plague over a period of time, right? But mankind's still here. We're progressing. Things do come right. Yes, people will die. I don't minimize that. People will die in this process. But I don't think it'll be anywhere as bad as the disaster forecasters are saying out there. It won't be as good as the ones saying it won't be anything either. But we will survive. We will come through it. And the thing to remember is this: whilst this may be hard and this may be really tough, and being at home and being under lockdown, imagine the people in World War I and World War II. And if we think this is hard, think back to that time, and imagine then, and think about, we are the generation that have come out of that. That is in our lifetimes. I mean, we weren't born then, most of us, but it is not that far away. And this compared to that is a breeze.
Mark, every day, and I say this to David and Michael, we try and look for silver linings. And as you say, this is certainly easier said than done. But one thing is for sure, coronavirus had not happened and COVID-19 wasn't sabotaging our lives. David Asarnow and Michael Pallerino and Nadia Bilchik talking to Mark Dyne. Any last thoughts, David and Michael, before I wrap up for Mark?
No, thank you so much for sharing. A lot of great insights. And I know those who read it in the book or watch it on Nadia's show will be able to take a lot of things from it and be able to apply it right to their lives. Thank you.
Any last thoughts, Michael?
The only thing I think you answered a little bit of the question I wanted to ask you with your last thoughts there is, you had mentioned earlier on that this is serious, and this is a game changer. I'm not big on cliches, but how do you, and one last, I guess, a final thought, how do you, pivoting is culture and leadership, how do you stress to somebody that this is serious? I mean, and it is time to change. Because I think there's people out there that think you can flip that switch and everything goes back the way it was, and that's not going to happen. So what is your advice to?
You have to keep drumming into their heads and understanding the reality of what we're in, and that's very age related. The younger people are, the harder they have to get this because they haven't had the life experience, and also, but this particular incident that we're facing has not had the impact on younger people, right? Traditional viruses have attacked the very young and very old. This one has attacked right dead in the middle and to the old. It has not attacked the very young. So of course, that has made it even more difficult. I'm not sure I can answer that question, to be honest. Not every question is answerable. I just keep drumming it into their heads. I think my kids and my kids' friends and everybody around me are tired of hearing it. But I think people are starting to say, wow, the stuff I was saying in February, wow, it was really true. I mean, that's been the number one comment to me in the last 48 hours from everybody is the stuff I was out there ranting about in February, whether they were doctors or businessmen, are starting to say, wow, how did you know? Well, I'll leave you with this thought. If you had a lily pond, a big pond, and it was covered in lilies, and I told you that on day 1, there was 1 lily, and on day 2, there was 2 lilies, and on day 3, there were 4 lilies, and on day 30, your entire pond was covered in lilies. I generally ask the young people, on what day do you think it was half covered in lilies? And the general answer I get is somewhere between 15 and 20 days. Of course, the answer is day 29, because it doubles every day. So on day 29, if it's half full, on day 30, it's completely full. That's what we're faced with here to make the seriousness hit home. It means, if you want to translate it for young people, and they do get the lily pond, is when you say to them, remember that on day 25, that's day 25 of the doubling period, only 3% of that pond was covered. But between day 25 and day 30, it went from 3% to 100% without changing its acceleration curve. That same curve took 25 days to get to 3% and only 5 days to go from 3% to 100%. That sometimes hits home.
Wow. Thank you to Mark Dyne. We've been speaking about pivoting. We've been speaking about game changers, entrepreneurial activity. Mark Dyne exemplifies all of this. Thank you so much for your advice and guidance, David Asarnow, Michael Pallerino, and me, Nadia Bilchik. We will be hearing and seeing more from Mark in our book. He may have just got us to change the name. Watch the space. Thank you.